It took us nearly 8 hours to reach the camp from the base checkpoint. The final stretch wound through a narrow road carved into the belly of the forest, thick with pines that seemed to lean too far in, as if whispering secrets to each other just above our heads. The van had no windows in the back where we sat, just metal walls and 2 benches. No one spoke for the last 2 hours of the ride. Not the woman beside me with the military haircut. Not the man clutching a duffel bag like it contained the last of his sanity. Not even me. At the final gate, 2 soldiers in gray uniforms motioned for us to step out, their expressions empty of warmth. One by one, we handed over our phones, watches, and even fitness trackers. For security reasons, they said, that phrase would become something of a refrain at the camp, uttered by tight-lipped superiors when explanations would only make things worse. The camp didn't look like a place where healing happened. It looked like something built to hold a secret. High fences wrapped in thick barbed wire surrounded the compound. Inside, modular metal buildings were arranged with clinical precision, their gray walls blending into the overcast sky. Guards patrolled the perimeter in quiet loops, guns slung loosely at their sides, but always ready. There were no welcome signs, no smiling faces, just the distant drone of cicadas and the sound of metal creaking in the breeze. We were led past rows of open-air enclosures, tall cages, really, with wide bars and chain-link walls. Inside, the infected sat or stood, always slow-moving, always eerily silent. Some stared straight ahead, unmoving for minutes at a time. Others wandered in small circles like moths trapped inside invisible jars. Most wore neutral expressions, though a few had eyes that twitched, scanning you as if trying to remember how to be human. Our lodging was a narrow, prefab dormitory with bare bunks and industrial showers. No meters, no windows, just a pinboard near the entrance where daily assignments were posted. I was one of 3 nurses assigned to Sector 3, which handled the newest arrivals, those still exhibiting higher function cognition. According to the briefing folder I was handed, that phase usually lasted about a week. After that, patients were transferred to nonverbal containment. The camp didn't call them patients. They were subjects. That word sat heavy in my gut. It was hard to tell how many people were being held here. The camp sprawled beyond view, with restricted areas sectioned off by high fencing and guard towers. But Sector 3 had maybe 20 individuals when I arrived. Their charts varied. Some had been exposed just days ago, others weeks. But the symptoms followed the same trajectory. Fever, fatigue, slowed response time, disconnection from speech, then finally, catatonia. The final stage was marked not by unconsciousness, but by a kind of unnerving stillness. A body sitting up, breathing steadily, eyes wide open but utterly unreachable. No one was ever discharged. I asked early on what happened to the ones who stopped responding. A medic shrugged and said they were transferred. To where? He didn't say. Some whispered that they went to Ward Delta, a building at the far edge of the camp behind a second layer of fencing. Others believed they were taken underground. Nobody knew for sure. Asking too many questions got you reassigned to sanitation duty. Days passed quickly, marked by routine and repetition. Each shift, I checked vitals, administered medication that never seemed to help, and tried to offer comfort to people who were slipping away by the hour. No one fought. No one screamed. It was as if the infection didn't just wear them down. It convinced them to give up. Then I met Tomas. He was around 18, maybe younger. Rail-thin with skin too pale for someone who'd spent time outdoors, but his eyes were clear. Alert, curious even. He greeted me the first time I checked on him with a quiet nod and the faintest twitch of smile. That alone made him different. Most of the others barely acknowledged my presence after the 2nd or 3rd day. Tomas still asked for food preferences, asked about the weather. Not because he cared, I don't think, but because he wanted to hear someone answer. To confirm there was still a world beyond the fences. He told me, during one of our brief check-ins, that he remembered being brought here in the middle of the night, that he hadn't seen his parents since, that he kept dreaming of the sky breaking open like an eggshell and something crawling out, something with too many eyes. He also told me not to get comfortable, that eventually Everyone here stopped talking. Not because they couldn't, but because they understood something. Something that made words unnecessary. I laughed it off, said he had a vivid imagination. But there was a tension in his posture, a knowledge just beneath his skin that made me doubt myself. He was the first one to mention the bell. He didn't explain what it was, only that I should be gone before I heard it. I didn't press him for more. I'd already learned that answers here were never worth the questions. Still, that warning stayed with me, like a splinter under the skin. What rattled me most was how he changed over the next few days. Slowly at first. Less talking, longer pauses, fewer questions. He still smiled, but it became mechanical, an echo of a reflex rather than a spark of emotion. On the fourth morning, I found him staring at the wall, not blinking, hands folded neatly in his lap. When I called his name, he turned toward me, deliberately, like a machine running on dying batteries, and nodded once. Then resumed staring. His chart was updated that night. Phase 4 onset likely. Prepare for transfer. He didn't speak again after that. The strange part? His vitals were perfect. There's a weight that settles on you in a place like this. A slow, creeping kind of heaviness. Not dread exactly. More like the sense that you've entered somewhere reality isn't entirely welcome. The forest feels too quiet. The air too still. Even the animals seem absent. No birds, no rustling in the brush. Just the wind clinking the chain-link fences like metal teeth chattering in the cold. And the infected, they don't die. Not here. At least, no one has seen it happen. They just fade, like the world is tuning them out, one neuron at a time. They stop talking, then they stop moving, then they stop needing, and finally they just wait. For what? I haven't figured out. But sometimes, late at night, when the sky turns darker than should be possible, I swear I hear something. A deep, reverberating clang from far off in the woods. Like a bell. I haven't told anyone. Not yet. It started with 5 of them. 5 patients from Sector 3 who had stopped responding within days of each other. Too fast, in my opinion, for the infection's usual trajectory. They'd all been relatively alert just the week before. Then came the long stares, the slack jaws, the slow drifting into silence. No cries, no resistance. Just surrender. Then they were gone. I came in for the evening shift and found their beds stripped bare, charts removed, names scrubbed off the whiteboard by the nurse's station. No mention of transfer, no farewell protocols. Just 5 empty spaces where human beings had been. One of the orderlies muttered something about Ward Delta. That was the first time I heard the name. The building itself sat past the west fence, just out of direct view from the dormitories. You could see its roof from the mess hall if you leaned far enough toward the window and squinted past the trees. It was darker than the rest of the buildings, taller too, with no visible windows. I never seen anyone go in or come out. No med carts, no transport vehicles, no signs of life. When I asked where they went, the medic on duty shrugged. He said Ward Delta handled advanced stage cases, palliative care maybe, or some kind of stabilization unit. His words felt rehearsed, like he wasn't sure what the building was for either. A few nights later, Maya told me what she saw. She'd been one of the newer volunteers, young but sharp. The kind of person who always double-checked dosages and asked questions that made supervisors sigh. She approached me outside the laundry room, eyes darting around like she expected someone to be listening. I could tell something was off before she even said anything. Her hands were trembling, and she kept glancing down the hall behind her like she'd lost something and hoped it wouldn't come back. She said she hadn't been able to sleep and had gone out for a walk near the perimeter trail. Not exactly allowed, but not unheard of. Some of us did laps just to feel like we were going somewhere. That night, she passed behind a western wing and saw movement near the fence line, someone walking along the edge of the trees. At first, she thought it was a guard, but the figure wasn't wearing a uniform. It was barefoot, shirtless. Its gait was jerky, like it wasn't used to its limbs anymore. When it passed beneath one of the floodlights, she saw its face. Or rather, she said the absence of face. The mouth was slack and trembling, the skin pale and stretched thin, but it was the eyes that made her freeze. There weren't any, just sunken, smooth hollows, as if the sockets had caved in. But the head turned toward her. It saw her. She was sure of it. She ran. The next day, Maya was gone. The announcement came at breakfast. One of the volunteers had experienced what the director called a psychogenic event. She'd been airlifted out for psychiatric treatment and would not be returning. No further details were given. No one said her name, but her bunk was stripped by noon and her nameplate removed by nightfall. That was the moment I stopped believing anything was under control. Something in me shifted. Up until then, I'd clung to the idea that this place, however strange, was operating within a framework. A bleak one, sure, but one governed by science and protocol. But people don't vanish like that. Not unless someone wants them to. I began writing things down. Not in the official charts, of course. Those were monitored. Every form, every note, every digital record was logged and backed up by security teams I'd never seen. So I found an old pocket notebook in the back of the laundry room, wedged behind a cabinet that hadn't been moved in years, and started documenting everything. Symptoms, behaviors, schedules, names. I focused first on respiration patterns. It seemed like such a small detail, but once I started watching for it, I couldn't ignore the pattern. The longer a subject stayed in the camp, the slower they breathed. Not erratically, there was no wheezing, no distress. It was deliberate, controlled, as if their bodies were learning to function on less. One patient I'd monitored daily had gone from a resting rate of 16 breaths per minute to just 4. That should have triggered alarms. But nothing in his vitals had changed. His heart rate remained steady, temperature normal, blood pressure optimal. If anything, he was healthier than before. They weren't declining. They were adjusting. And not just physically. Their behavior changed too. In early stages, patients were anxious, fidgety, desperate for answers. But by week 2, that energy faded. They no longer asked about release dates or families. They stopped requesting books or news updates. They simply accepted. That acceptance was more chilling than panic. It wasn't sedation. It wasn't defeat. It was a quiet understanding I couldn't reach. The notebook filled fast. I had to write in code, just in case. I kept it hidden in the ventilation grate above my bunk, behind a loose metal panel. Every entry I made came with the same quiet question. Were we actually treating? Because it didn't feel like a disease anymore. It felt like something else was happening to these people. Like they were being recruited into a state we didn't have language for. One night, while changing linens in the admin wing, I noticed a folder sitting unattended at the front desk. The logbook, internal registry, probably harmless. But curiosity and fear are cousins. I told myself I'd glance and leave. Just one look. The folder contained patient histories, intake dates, notes from higher clearance personnel. Most of the entries were recent. A few weeks old, maybe a month. But then I turned a page and saw a name I recognized. One of the silent ones. A man who hadn't moved from his bed in the 3 weeks I'd been here. The entry listed his date of admission. 3 years ago. I checked another. A woman from Sector 4 who hadn't spoken since I arrived. Her intake date, 14 months back. Another name. Another year. 2 years. 4. All listed as active status. None discharged. None deceased. My hands went cold. I knew what I was looking at wasn't supposed to exist. The official training had emphasized a quarantine period of 30 to 60 days. The virus ran its course, they said. Bodies were monitored, then released or transferred. No mention of long-term containment. No mention of people staying here indefinitely, suspended in silence like clocks with broken hands. And yet, the records were clear. They hadn't been released. They hadn't died. They were still here, still breathing, still waiting. I left the folder exactly where I found it and walked back to the dorm with legs that barely listened. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, heart thudding like a fist in a coffin, the silence outside pressing in on the thin metal walls of the room like a tide waiting to pull me under. The notebook burned behind the grate. I wasn't sure who was watching anymore, but I was certain someone was. Sleep had become impossible. It started subtly. Little cracks in the rhythm of my nights. Restless limbs, phantom sounds, a rising anxiety that coiled tighter each time I tried to close my eyes. The bunk creaked beneath me as I tossed, stared at the ceiling, counted the seconds. but something always kept me alert. Something not entirely mine. By the fourth night of near silence, I began hearing it. A distant metallic clang, faint at first. It echoed through the forest like it was being struck underwater. One long, low ring, then a pause, then another, like a bell being rung slowly and deliberately. It always came at the exact same time, 3:07 a.m. Every night, I started checking the clock obsessively, waiting for it, dreading it. And no matter how much I told myself it was a coincidence or an auditory hallucination born from exhaustion, it never stopped. Always the same rhythm, always the same hour. 3 chimes, never more, never less. Like a summons, or a countdown. No one else seemed to hear it, or maybe they were pretending not to. I stopped asking after the second night. It was easier that way, safer. The insomnia hollowed me out. My face thinned, my bones ached. My hands trembled when I tried to hold utensils. My own vitals were checked weekly, of course, but the staff logs were vague and strangely optimistic. Stable, within range. That phrase kept appearing, even when I knew it wasn't true. And still, the bell kept ringing. I couldn't take it anymore. On the 7th night of waking in a cold sweat, I decided to find it. The camp was oddly quiet after midnight. The usual patrols had dwindled. Only 2 guards remained at the north tower, their silhouettes barely visible against the dark pines. The main gates remained locked, but the side fence near the supply yard had a section where the barbed wire sagged. It was just enough. My breath fogged in the chill as I moved quickly, head low. Every step on the gravel felt like a gunshot, though no alarms sounded. No voices called out. No footsteps followed. Only the wind and the sound of the bell. It grew louder as I made my way deeper into the forest. Trees stood like black monoliths around me, motionless despite the wind's steady hiss. The trail, if it could be called that, was little more than a dent in the underbrush. But the bell called clearly now, reverberating through my chest, low and ancient. Not electronic, not mechanical. It was ritualistic. After what felt like an hour of weaving through the trees, I found it. The building stood alone in a clearing, half swallowed by moss and shadow. It wasn't like the camp structures. Taller, narrower, built of concrete and something darker, something matte and featureless. There were no windows, no lights, no signs, just a single rusted door, cracked slightly open. No guards, no locks. And yet, every part of me screamed not to go inside. But I did. The first thing I noticed was the smell, antiseptic but undercut by something else. Something dry and old, like burned parchment or shed skin. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. My steps echoed softly on smooth concrete, the walls pulsing with dim emergency lights that flickered like dying stars. And then the corridor opened into a chamber. Beds lined the room, 6 on each side. They looked like standard medical cots, but everything was too clean, too untouched, as though no one had moved in here for a long time. But the figures lying on the beds hadn't decomposed. They hadn't moved either. Waxy. That's the only word that comes to mind. Their skin looked polished, too pale, stretched tight over bones. Their eyes were open, no, hollow. Some didn't seem to have pupils at all. Their mouths hung slightly ajar, frozen mid-breath. Limbs unmoving, chests rising, falling but barely. Still breathing. Still alive? I don't know. One of them, a woman, lay closest to the door. Her hands were curled near her chest like she had been mid-convulsion before stilling. Her jaw twitched. Then her eyelid blinked once, slowly. I backed up, my body refusing to breathe. The others were motionless, but there was a feeling in the room. A density, like being watched by a crowd that refused to move. I turned, ready to leave, until I saw the board. It was bolted to the wall near the exit. A clipboard hung beneath it. I almost didn't look. I should have kept walking. Should have run. But I didn't. There were names typed in neat black letters. Some had check marks next to them. Others were crossed out. Many I didn't recognize. But halfway down the list in bold. Redacted, staff, stabilization phase. 6 days remaining. My name. It was my name. Right there, printed and underlined. Just another entry among the rest. The clipboard slipped from my hands. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I wasn't sure if my body had forgotten how to function or if something else had taken control. I grabbed my own wrist, checking for a pulse. Slow. So slow. I counted 6 seconds. Only one beat. Then another. And another. I couldn't believe it. My heart rate had slowed. Significantly. Just like the patient's. Just like the subject's. I hadn't noticed it during the day. I'd written it off as exhaustion or stress or nerves. But no, it was real, measurable, irrefutable. Something was happening to me. I stumbled out of the room, back into the forest, hands trembling so violently I could barely keep my footing. Every step felt too loud. The bell had stopped ringing. The forest was too quiet, as if holding its breath. I couldn't find a path. I wandered in circles for what felt like an eternity before seeing the edge of the fence again. Crawled under, ran back toward the dorms with blood roaring in my ears. But not my heart. My heart remained slow, rhythmic, calm, too calm. By the time I collapsed into my bunk, the world had tilted sideways. My skin felt too tight, my chest too still. I pressed my fingers to my throat. Counted again. 4. Just 4. The notebook behind the grate felt like a warning from someone else's life. And in the dark, I realized the worst part wasn't that I had seen those bodies. It was that I understood them now, and they were waiting. Something inside the camp had shifted. It was subtle at first, so slight, I almost convinced myself it was paranoia. But once you begin noticing the cracks, you realize they were always there, hairline fractures running through the surface of the routine. And now they were spreading fast. It began with silence. Not from the patients, silence was expected from them, but from the staff. The usual clinical chatter, radio calls, hallway banter gone. The medics stopped speaking unless absolutely necessary. Orders were passed on scribbled notes or through subtle hand gestures. Meals were served without eye contact. Laughter disappeared entirely. I watched a physician, Dr. Yarrow, the one with the coffee addiction and sarcastic streak, sit in the mess hall for 4 hours straight, just staring at the far wall. Unblinking. His untouched tray sat in front of him until the food grew cold and gelatinous. And still, he didn't move. When someone finally tried to speak to him, he just turned away, eyes glassy, as if the wall held more meaning than any of us ever could. A few days later, one of the medics began bleeding. She sat on the floor of the supply room with her sleeve rolled up, dragging a paperclip slowly across her forearm, tracing out a complex series of symbols. Not random scratches, deliberate shapes, concentric circles, sharp angles that intersected like some kind of language. Her blood dripped silently onto the floor, pooling around her knees. When I rushed in to help, she looked up at me with a beatific smile. Not pained, not dazed, grateful. No one stopped her. No one reported it. Not even me. We were all slipping. I started noticing the same symbols elsewhere, carved faintly into the backs of clipboards, etched into dirt behind the mess hall, scrawled on the inner walls of patient enclosures. I saw them in condensation on the mirrors, in the frost on the window panes before dawn. The camp wasn't just decaying. It was transforming, and the staff, those still functioning, had become too calm. It wasn't sedation. It was resignation. They moved like they knew something I didn't, like their purpose had been fulfilled and the rest was just waiting. There was no more urgency, no more talk of treatment or containment. Even the guards had stopped their usual patrols, choosing instead to linger at the perimeter fence, backs to the camp, facing the woods. I returned to Tomas one morning, desperate for something, anything that made sense. He'd always been a sort of compass, even in his decline, a tether to what was real. His cot was empty. At first, I thought he'd been transferred, moved silently, as so many were. But then I saw him, not lying down, not catatonic, but standing. He was in the far corner of the enclosure, upright, unmoving, his body eerily still. Not stiff, not tense, just motionless like a statue in mid-thought. His arms hung loosely at his sides, his head slightly tilted upward toward the sky. His eyes, once expressive and bright, were dull now, murky like water that had stilled too long in a dark place. And then, as I stepped closer, his mouth opened. A dry, broken whisper slipped through, just 3 words, no louder than a breath. But it was enough to stop me cold. His mouth shut again. He didn't speak after that. He didn't move. But I knew, whatever was coming, it was already in motion. That night, the camp changed for good. The alarms began just after midnight, shrill and unrelenting. Red lights pulsed across the sky, bathing the trees and dorms in a stuttering, artificial glow. For a moment, I thought it was a drill, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't the steady rise and fall of a test alarm. It was chaotic, staggered. Urgent! I ran to the window and saw floodlights swing toward the gate, the main perimeter entrance, the one that had remained sealed since the day I arrived. For the first time, it was opening. Not pried open, not forced, unlocked. The massive gates groaned as they swung outward, hinges screaming against rust and resistance. No trucks rolled in, no teams in hazmat suits, just an open mouth facing the forest beyond. The path ahead stretched into blackness. And the guards? They didn't stop it. They didn't move at all. They were kneeling, 4 of them in total, lined up along the gate like sentinels in prayer. Their weapons lay at their sides, untouched. Their helmets had been removed. Their heads bowed. Their lips moved in unison. The same word over and over. I couldn't hear it clearly at first. The alarm still rang too loud. But as I stepped out into the open air, the tones began to fade, like the camp was already fading from itself. Then I heard it. One word, repeated like a mantra, like a promise, like a homecoming. Return. I stood there frozen as the gate widened, swallowing the fence line in shadow. Beyond it, the forest pulsed with something unseen, something vast and aware. The trees leaned in toward the opening, drawn like magnets to a charge. The air had changed. It felt heavier, wetter, dense with pressure that pressed against the skin like a second atmosphere. Every breath was like drinking warm ink. The silence of the patients behind me grew thicker. None of them spoke. None of them moved. But I could feel them watching. Not with curiosity, with recognition. As if this was the moment they'd all been waiting for. Not treatment. Not recovery. This. The unlocking. Somewhere far off, I heard the bell again. 3 chimes. Always 3. And for the first time, it didn't sound distant. It sounded near. Like it was inside the camp. Like it was inside me. I ran. Not out of bravery. Not out of hope. It was the kind of run that comes from the body overriding the mind. A blind, primal surge that screams leave even when the air itself pushes back against each step. I sprinted past the kneeling guards and through the yawning gate, its rusted hinges still groaning as they stretched wide to meet the dark. The forest swallowed me immediately. The moment I crossed the threshold, the lights of the camp dimmed behind me. Not flickered, dimmed, as if they had never really been there to begin with. The woods were deeper than I remembered. The trees seemed taller, more twisted. Their branches clawed at the sky in unnatural patterns, and the path beneath my feet twisted, narrowed, then vanished altogether. But I kept moving, tearing through underbrush, ducking beneath low limbs, stumbling over roots that curled like veins through damp soil. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. It was already following, or maybe leading. Hard to say which now, after what felt like hours, maybe days. I came upon a clearing. I collapsed to my knees, lungs screaming, blood pounding through my ears. My fingers dug into the cold earth for grounding, but it gave no comfort. The soil felt wrong, thin, as if stretched over something else. I looked up. The gate was there, wide open. Behind it, the camp, exactly where I had started. I don't remember walking back. I don't remember turning around. But I was there, standing just beyond the perimeter, the fencing hanging loosely in shredded strips like rotted silk. The camp looked unchanged, silent, still, except it wasn't. There was no light, no movement, no guards, no alarms, and no sun. The sky above hadn't brightened in 2 days. That much I was certain of. Not a sunrise, not a shift in color, just endless twilight, as if the heavens had paused. The air tasted metallic, like old coins soaked in stagnant water. There was no temperature, no time. Even the clocks had stopped ticking. I re-entered the camp slowly, not out of fear anymore. That had burned off somewhere in the woods. What was left was something worse: understanding. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. The patients were gone from their enclosures. The staff had vanished. Even the ones who had once traced symbols on their skin or whispered to the walls had disappeared, as if the entire camp had taken a collective step backward out of reality. But the buildings still stood, and so did I. I walked through Sector 3. The empty beds, the stripped bulletin board, Tomas's enclosure, bare, open, undisturbed. He was gone. The only sound was the dull squish of my boots against the damp concrete. I made my way to the med office. It was habit more than anything, a final act of motion to delay the stillness that threatened to root itself in my bones. The front desk was untouched, drawers closed, files stacked neatly, but one drawer near the bottom stuck out slightly, crooked, like something jammed inside had been hastily stuffed away and forgotten. I knelt, pulled it open. The folder was thick and heavy, marked in faded ink, historical incidents. The pages inside were old, yellowed at the edges. Some handwritten, others typed on machines that had long since gone extinct. I flipped through them without knowing what I was looking for, then stopped. There was a black and white photo, warped slightly from moisture. A younger version of the camp. Less fencing, fewer buildings, but the same layout. Same skeletal trees surrounding it like sentries. A date scrawled on the back, June 1993. My eyes drifted down to a list printed below the photo. Intake registry. 12 names. One of them was mine. Not a similar name. My name. Same spelling. Same middle initial. Same birth date. But the year was wrong. The file said I had been processed into the facility in 1993. Over 30 years ago. I dropped the folder, staggered backward, heart hammering out a rhythm my brain couldn't keep up with. I reached for the desk to steady myself and caught sight of the mirror above the sink. It was cracked, for sharp lines slicing through the reflection like fractures in reality. But the face looking back at me wasn't mine, or at least, not the one I remembered. The skin was colorless, thin, my cheeks hollow, eyes shadowed with deep, permanent grooves. But it was the eyes themselves that stopped me. Clouded, gray-white, faintly iridescent, like polished stone left under still water too long. Eyes I had seen in others. In Tomas, in the waxen husks in Ward Delta, in the patients who sat too still for too long. I raised my hand. The reflection did too, albeit slower, like a delay in a broadcast. My breathing was shallow, barely present. No wonder my vitals had always been stable. No wonder I never felt hunger anymore. No wonder I couldn't remember what came before the camp. What my life had been, where I had come from, who I loved, who I lost. Those memories had always felt slightly staged, like pages in a book I hadn't read in years. Familiar, but not mine, because they weren't. I hadn't come here. I had been here, maybe from the beginning, maybe always. The gates, I realized then, had never been locked to keep us in. They were never a barrier. They were a boundary, a seal, and now they were open, not to let us go, but to let something in, or something back. I stepped outside again. The darkness remained, still and thick as oil. No birds, no wind, just the distant echo of the bell. 3 chimes, then silence. And in that silence, I finally understood what Tomas had meant when he said it was almost time. The gates were open now, and I was finally still enough to understand why.